if you've done assignment 4F, you might have wondered what this says, and maybe you know someone who's an Arabic speaker who read it for you. And the secret message behind this is the United States of America. So, very scary little message there, written out phonetically, the name of our country. So moving on to the next slide, reading is the other side of literacy. Writing is the productive skill and reading is the receptive skill. So reading can be also difficult for students who come from a different script background. We may not notice it, or you may not have ever thought about it, but when you're a child, you sound words out. You decode a word letter by letter. But as you grow older, you begin to actually memorize words. So you don't look at a word like stop and think stop and think, what does that mean, stop? You just see that and automatically your brain has memorized that word. So even if somebody writes something like that, you probably can guess what they meant to write. They meant to write stop. On your slide, there's a paragraph which gives you an example of that. So in the middle point on your slide starts with, according to a researcher at Cambridge University. And if you're reading along with me, you can see that I'm actually reading what my brain knows is right, even though all the words are mixed up in this paragraph. And you can see as you read through the paragraph how much we've memorized. So, because we memorize, we don't really decode letters anymore. When you think about our international students, because they have not memorized words since they were small children in English, they actually have to go through and decode each letter. It's much slower. And actually, when I learned to read Arabic script, I know all the letters because I studied for a couple of years, but I don't have the words memorized. When an Arab reader looks at this, they know what it says, the, automatically, but I have to think the, okay? So for me, I'm very slow at reading. People ask me if I can read Arabic, and I say, yeah, sort of, but very slowly. And that's the same thing that your international students have to do, unless they've had many years of experience. But any of who are more beginners at reading, they really have to sound out each letter, put it together, and figure out what the word means. And the fact that we have so many words that are homonyms, similar spellings but different pronunciations, like daughter and laughter spelled the same with completely different pronunciation. There are so many situations like that it makes reading a much longer process because there are many more steps involved. A final thing about literacy it actually has to do with writing on a higher level. Besides just producing the letters and producing words, we all know that writing involves a strategy. So we teach our students to brainstorm and then to take their brainstorming and to organize the ideas in their brainstorm and to write an essay with an introduction and a conclusion and several body paragraphs, and to have a topic sentence at the beginning of each paragraph. And there's all of these structures of organization that your students may be completely unfamiliar with. The whole process of writing, brainstorm, organization, first draft, revise, second draft, revise, final draft, all that process, all of that could be very unfamiliar to them, so you really have to take them through it step by step. Finally, on this slide that talks about writing strategies, at the bottom you have Kaplan's doodles. Kaplan was an anthropologist who kind of used these doodles to, with very broad brushstrokes, to talk about how different cultures think and write. So while English thinkers kind of think in a straight line. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. Semitic thinkers, people who speak Arabic, who are from the Middle East, they tend to go forward, but then they're constantly thinking about the past and how that affects them. So they're constantly revisiting the past as they move forward. They're slowly moving forward, but the past affects them much more strongly than it does us. For us, the past is back there and we're just headed straight into the future. This also affects how they write. They don't write in a straight line. They're used to kind of going back and revisiting things that they've already written about over and over again in a way that may be repetitious to us. Oriental or Asian cultures are more circular in their thinking, so that produces a different writing style. And Romantic and Russian cultures also have kind of a different way of taking tangential digressions as they're pursuing something. They're a little more straight than Semitic or Oriental cultures, but still they tend to go off on tangents. So you have to think about a culture's writing process, a culture's thinking process, and realize that it might be very foreign for a student to go A to B to C to D in a straight line as we expect them to. So that will take some instruction. On the next slide, a few other challenges for international students have to do with note-taking, which is very difficult, and note-taking is partly related to the difficulties with writing. But you have to think about how many different processes a student goes through. First of all, they have to listen to the teacher and the words coming out. They decode what those words say. That's the second thing. Then they have to take all of those words and determine which ones are really the important ones. Because you don't write down everything a teacher says in a lecture. You have to prioritize what is an important point. Then you have to kind of summarize it or shorten it. You discern what's important and then summarize that and make it short enough that you can write it down while your teacher continues to talk. And then you have to re-encode it into English language, an English script, which may not be familiar to you, and then write it all down and remember all the vocabulary that you need to write it and how to write the letters. So that's at least 6 steps that you have to go through to write down the notes for one point that a teacher mentions in a lecture. And meanwhile, the teacher keeps talking. So as you're going through those steps, who knows how much you've missed because the teacher keeps talking. So please take that into consideration when you give lectures, that your internationals might be trying their best to keep up, but it's really tough with that many things to do. They're working 6 times as hard as your domestic students. Another thing, something that most teachers, even here at Cascade, and as I've given a teacher survey, many teachers have said that students do not participate in class discussion, international students. This is one of their lowest areas. And there are several reasons why an international might not participate in class discussion. 2 of the most common ones are, 1, they don't have the confidence. They might know the answer, but they might be very shy to speak out in English. And it's not so much about what the answer is and whether it's right or wrong, although that might be a doubt in their mind. But on top of that, they have doubts about whether they can actually express the answer in correct English with correct grammar and correct pronunciation. And so they're thinking about all these different elements of ways that they could fail, so very often they opt to not say anything at all. We as teachers might look at them and think, oh, they don't know any of the answers, they don't participate, they must not be doing the homework, but actually they might know all the answers, they're just afraid to say anything. Secondly, if they come from that, the kind of culture where the teacher is the authority and the learner is meant to just be obedient, then they may come into your classroom and think that to speak during a classroom discussion is the ultimate sign of disrespect, and so their silence is actually how they respect you. So you have to instruct them and teach them that the culture is different here and the expectations are different. All right, the next slide, we talk about hot climate cultures, which are high context cultures, and they tend to have traditional learning strategies. So traditional learning strategies, we're thinking about memorization, rote memorization, observing someone else doing a task and then repeating it or copying it, and imitating it, but not so much question and answer, talking, lecture. That is actually more what you call formal learning strategies. And these formal learning strategies are much more common in cold climate cultures or low context cultures, in which the classroom is interactive, there's questions and answers, there's critical thinking, okay? And so when you have students from traditional learning backgrounds coming into a formal learning context, you have these issues, especially around classroom dynamics, interaction, questions, and answers. So to explore that more in assignment 4G, I want you to read in this book, Teaching Cross-Culturally, which you should have either bought or checked out. I want you to read chapter 4, which begins on page 45, Formal Schooling and Traditional Learning. And there's a few questions here about what you learn, about the differences between these two approaches, the challenges, and how actually Jesus' own teaching method is reflected in these two approaches, and what we can learn from the other side. Whereas Cascade is more of a formal learning institution, what can we learn from traditional learning methods?